And with that, I think if I could turn it over to Christy, she could talk about some of the general comments we received on things.
Good afternoon. Christy Vosberg with the Attorney General's Office. I'm here to review for you some general themes received in the comments on the regulation package and your staff's general thoughts on those themes. You'll hear later when you go through the matrix more specific comments and the proposed revisions in response to those comments. And I wanted to note also that these and all comments will be responded to more specifically and in more detail in the final statement of reasons. And I'm here just to present more general thoughts about those comments. As Dan mentioned, extensive comments on the regulation package were received, but many of them will be familiar to you because you've heard them throughout this extensive process leading up to the regulation language. Overall, many of the comments raised fundamental disagreement with the Council's approach, but your staff remains confident that the approach taken in the regulations are within the Council's authority and appropriately meet the Delta Reform Act's requirements. There are seven general themes that I'm going to run through, and the first one is that the Council lacks authority to take a regulatory approach. And this has already been discussed today a little bit, but the Delta Reform Act calls for an approach that includes a significant regulatory component. It requires the Council to adopt a legally enforceable Delta plan and establishes a consistency review process to use to enforce those regulations. And the Delta Reform Act requires the Delta plan to be consistent with the Coastal Zone Management Act, which in turn requires that the Delta plan be enforceable. The second general theme is similar. It's that the Council lacks the authority to adopt specific key regulations such as WRP1 or DP1. And again, the Delta Reform Act requires an enforceable Delta plan, and then it also lays out specific issues that must be addressed by the Delta plan. And therefore, the regulations appropriately have the appropriate authority. The third general theme is that some regulations constitute a taking of property without compensation. The policies include appropriate regulation of land uses and do not result in a taking of private property. The fourth theme is that the regulations affect water rights and area of origin rights, and again, we disagree. The Delta Plan policies do not infringe on those rights. And the fifth theme is that some of the regulations conflict with the authority of other state or local agencies. And in fact, often agency jurisdictions overlap, and a person seeking to undertake a project would have to receive approvals from various agencies, including federal, state, and local agencies. The regulations proposed recognize and incorporate coordination between agencies, but there are a few spots in the proposed language where staff is proposing revisions to avoid any potential overlap or duplication of those other agencies' authorities. And when we go through the specific regulations, we'll run through those changes. The sixth theme is that some regulations improperly mix non-regulatory language with regulatory language. Staff has proposed revisions to the language to separate out regulatory requirements from explanations and definitions. So we'll run through those in more detail when we get to those specific regulations. And then the seventh and last theme is that some of the regulations lack clarity about what regulated entities are required to do. And generally speaking, the staff believes the regulations are clear, but there are a few occasions where revisions are proposed in the matrix to clarify and add more to respond to those comments, and Dan will review those in more specific detail. So though you've seen many of these comments, and many of them were considered in the development of the Delta Plan in the first place, staff believes still that the general approach taken by the regulations is the right approach, And all of these comments will be responded to in more detail in the final statement of reasons.
Okay. Mr. Fiorini? All right. Mr. Ray, anything else?
I think we're maybe ready to dig into GP1.
Okay. I'm sorry, Ms. Gray.
Just a question. Thank you for that information today. I did want to go back to your themes that you provided explanations for, and I thought I heard you say that you will give more explanation on some of them in May. Is that correct? I mean, are these the only explanations you will provide to the council? Go on. I'm sorry.
The council will receive and review a final statement of reasons in May, and included in that will be specific responses to all the comments received on the regulation package.
Right. You know, the one that has to do with regulations affect water rights. Will you provide a more detailed explanation on that one?
Yes, that will be also responded to in the final statement of reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Natoli.
Yeah, just maybe following up on what Gloria's question to Christy. Some of the commenters in the general comment section, and there are specific references as it relates to some of the proposed regulations, but there's some references to either omissions and or lack of clarity as least referring to, and one of them has to be Appendix P, and it, obviously it relates to some of the regulations. How are we responding to that, or either if they said there's something that's been omitted, it may have been something that's gone on before, or it was in there now, they've gotten transported or just stricken altogether. How are we tracking that, Christy? And for example, if there was a reference, people had an understanding when the draft was last released, and now they see in this draft that it's gone, maybe it didn't get moved, it just went away. How are we tracking that?
Well, each comment that is made on the regulation package has to be responded to, and so staff has developed, extensive matrices to track different comments and make sure that each comment is responded to. And in the instance, I mean, it would really depend on the specific comment. I'm not sure which,
Okay, well, some of the, for example, some of the mountain counties have talked about Appendix P, and maybe we get into this when we get to 5001 as far as the regulations. But where there was a reference to that was much clearer, there seems to be lack of clarity, and maybe Cindy, that's been corrected, or Dan, or not. But I mean, it's mentioned here in their letters of January and February. Mm-hmm. In my reading, maybe I wasn't able to decipher that was re-referenced, or
why don't we deal with that when we get to WRP1? If that's all right. But what you will see, and what commenters will see in the final rulemaking package, is that every single comment we receive is going to be responded to. So we'll either be able to explain, here's why we disagree with you, or here's what you've misunderstood, or here's how we suggest the policy, here's how the council has proposed to revise the policy, in response to the concerns that you've raised about clarity or authority or whatever.
But it was under general comments. I wasn't jumping ahead of you.
Okay.
This is in the general comments section that that it was included in, and there's obviously the code as to what it refers back to. But that's why I was raising it now versus waiting till later. I'm fine with that. Because what related to was more to the connectivity to an appendix. It's still going to be a part of the plan, but then I guess that provided a clearer stream of delineation as it relates to how it would be applied or under what conditions. So, all right. I guess we'll wait and hear more.
Ms. Gray.
Comments. And I know we will go through the different areas, but just some overall comments. I know these themes are really the important issues that people still have some issues with. And so, I've heard that I agree that you've done a better job with clearing up and making sure that people understand different reasons why you recommend certain things. So clarity is an issue as well, as the fact that folks have questioned the authority of the council to do certain things. So I think it really behooves you to put as much detail as you can to justify why staff disagrees with positions that different stakeholders have given in terms of their input. So I think these themes are really important And so if staff disagrees with the position of different stakeholders, I think it really makes sense to really put down as much information as you can as to clarify or to justify why staff disagrees with this, because you're providing it as a recommendation to the council.
Yeah.
But, thank you for the information. Just want to stress that it's very important to put down as much information as you can to justify what you're recommending to the council to do, especially the authority to do certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I might just interject here, that's great advice, and we will do that, and we're in the process of doing that. Again, you're going to see more detailed responses to all of the comments at your May meeting as part of the final statement of reasons, it's called, that supports the regulations. What we tried to do here, though, was just to flag in a very general way the general themes that we've seen, and again, to point them out because you've heard them over the course of 2.5 years.
Right.
And so when in the staff report, for instance, taking the first bullet point, the council doesn't have authority to take a regulatory approach, we've heard that from day one.
Right.
We've said from day one that we absolutely do. In fact, we've gone through in detail in public session on numerous occasions why we are certain that we do. But in any event, in the final statement of reasons, you'll see a more detailed analysis of that. But I can assure you on that point that you're not going to make everybody happy and that there will be disagreements. But this is, if not the fundamental issue, one of the most important issues. But the point here is just to bring it to your attention that we're not ignoring it, but you're not going to see any changes that we're suggesting based on this allegation, because we just think it's false.
Yeah, and thank you for that, those comments. But again, there may not be any significant changes, but I think it is wise to put down as much clarity as you can to support your position on it. Thank you.
And if, Councilmember Gray, as we go through the individual policies, if there are comments that we receive that we're not responding to and you have a particular question about them, I feel free, to ask us, because I think we understand why we're not suggesting changes to things, and we would provide an opportunity for discussion up front too.